Hey guys, this is your host Ibrahim Susiwala, and you are listening to the podcast Crony Convo. I have a very esteemed guest on today, Mr. Jayant Bhandari. How are you doing, sir?
Um, Good to be with you, Ibrahim. How are you?
I'm good, sir. I'm very good. Thank you for taking the time out, sir. It's been a
Yeah,
long,
thanks for
long
having
time
me.
since I've been actually trying to get you on the show. And for the people, for the viewers who are wondering why I am in a suit today, uh, it's because I am with a fraternity person, with a professional, Jayant Bhandari, who is an investor consultant. Am I right, sir? Is it the right designation?
That's correct. Yeah.
All right, okay. And because Jayant sir was coming on the show, I thought that I need to dress up the right way, because most of the podcasts that I do are much more into t-shirts and just shirt or something. But this is what I wear every day as a professional. And if I have a professional on the podcast, I want to dress the perfect way, sir. So this is all for you.
Well, I'm not wearing a jacket right now, Ibrahim. But next time when I talk with you, I will make sure to put one on.
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely. That's completely fine, sir. So I have been following the Hunger Games series that you have been posting on Facebook, sir. And that is a pretty big point why I have actually brought you on the show, because you have a very different kind of a perspective on what is happening around the world, especially in India. And whilst you are staying in Canada, you are informing people with the right kind of information, the true picture that is to be shown, which is not being shown by the mainstream media in India. So this Hunger Games series, how did you come up with that, sir?
Well, it seems like to me that Narendra Modi and Amit Shah are jointly running a Hunger Games show in this country.
All right.
And I'm talking about India.
Yeah, right.
What has happened over the last 2 months since the announcement of the lockdown, which is not actually a lockdown, it's a curfew across the country for absolutely everyone. What they have done is that they have enforced complete control over everyone. They have put absolutely everyone under house arrest.
Right.
Now, despite that they have put these people under house arrest, they have shown themselves to be utterly and totally incompetent.
Right.
The government is incompetent, the bureaucrats is incompetent, the police is brutally beating up people, and the courts are sitting silently.
Right.
It's the job of the Indian courts to come out and say that the police has no authority to beat up people.
Right.
Those policemen should be criminally charged. Also, government should be criminally charged for locking people down without providing food to them. Right. Millions, tens of millions, probably hundreds of millions of Indians are starving or are in hunger right now. Government lied in the Supreme Court saying that there were no migrants on the road. There have been consistently migrants on the road walking 1,500 kilometers to get to their rural places. Government lied to the court, but the court then never criminally charged the government for lying in front of the court. Right. So that is the kind of Orwellian, dystopian structure that Indians currently exist in. And that is the reason why I call it Hunger Games. I have written about 3 articles on this subject. I actually have 2 more articles going into publication. Right. One actually calls it 2 of them call it Hunger Games, because Amit Shah and Narendra Modi are actually so incompetent and they are so sadistic in their approach to how they deal with Indians that I have no inhibitions in calling this show a Hunger Games.
All right. Fair enough. See, coming to the courts part, there is a truth that they should be intervening into what is happening all over the country. The government has been incompetent in a very different manner. So, taking out all the violence that has been happening in India and taking out all the shit show that has been seen over the lockdown was put in not just to flatten the curve, but also to back yourself up with the right kind of healthcare system, to make the proper arrangements for the healthcare system. And I have talked to a lot of other professionals as well in the healthcare, and they have been telling me that there is not adequate healthcare backup now. Because if the cases are going to increase once the lockdown is over on this at the end of this month, And if the cases are going to increase, which they are, there is not enough place for quarantining people. So that is the main problem. In a country of 1.30 billion, you don't have the place to keep even 5% of the population if they get sick. And we are not even 1% infected right now, according to the total population.
So, Ibrahim, the incompetence of government of India shows up in the fact that India did the most, by far the most atrocious lockdown of any country on the planet. China did a lockdown in a very limited amount of areas, and it was limited lockdown over a limited period of time. India did the most atrocious and the longest lockdown by far compared to any other country on the planet. And despite this, the problem is that the number of cases in India are actually growing exponentially right now. So in the last 2 months, these people have completely failed. After putting 1.38 billion people under house arrest, they have completely failed to even control the base of the number of people who are under COVID-19 influence.
Right.
Now, what I hear from people who have been to hospitals or who have faced the government bureaucrats in terms of their suffering in terms of COVID-19, they have told me that there is complete apathy among the frontline staff. People don't get beds. They hang around outside hospitals for hours, sometimes for days. They have no plan on anyone. Now, if you have locked down the country, at least you should have controlled the virus, if nothing else.
Right.
And they have failed in it. And that shows how sadistic, how completely and utterly incompetent. And so incompetent they are that it seems that there is some intelligence behind their incompetence.
Right, right. So just for the listeners and the viewers, where can they find your articles online?
So they can go to, they can probably Google my name and write Lew Rockwell or Zero Hedge or Mises India and Liberty Magazine. So I've written articles for 4 of these publications on this specific issues.
Right.
So Mises India, Lew Rockwell, Zero Hedge, and Lew Rockwell.
All right. Okay. So all the listeners, you can actually follow Jayant Bhandari's articles in these places, and you can search his name on the internet, and you can also follow him on Facebook. You are on Instagram, sir, or just on Facebook?
No, I'm not. I'm just on Facebook and Twitter.
Listeners can actually follow you on Facebook. It's very easy. You just need to search Jayant Bhandari, and I'm pretty sure you will be able to find the charming face of sir on the Facebook. So that's the way you can follow. So one thing that we are missing out of all this is the Arogya Setu app that the government is trying to implement. And I totally believe that it is illegal. It is surveillance that government is trying to enforce, and people are not understanding about that, sir.
Well, anything like that has to go through a legislative process, and it should also be challenged in the court. Government of India decided to enforce it on people without a legislative process and without getting challenged in the court.
That's right.
This is nothing but an authoritarian government today. We have no institutions left in the country today because they can force on you a tracking application which tracks you wherever you go.
Right.
Now, is that really required? And if it is required, why did they not take care to get an approval of the president, of the legislature, and of the Supreme Court? Now, this is only required for certain kind of people, not all kinds of people. And a lot of people have come out that this is not an open code software, which means that we don't know what this app is doing to your data, and you don't know what kind of data it is collecting from your mobile phone. And this is outrageous in my view. I feel utterly and completely angry about visiting India after having heard of this app.
Right. So here's the story. Excuse me. I was in Dubai in March when all this whole lockdown thing was unfolding. And the announcement was made that from 18th of March, the government of India is going to put a mandatory quarantine for each and every person in civil hospitals around the country. And so I rushed back to India on 17th of March, and I observed my self quarantine during that time. And the Surat Municipal Corporation people used to come to my house and used to check on me each and every day, which was very good, very nice of them. But they also enforced on me a local software of Surat Municipal Corporation, which was tracking my movement during that time.
Mhm.
And which is completely fine again, because most of the cases were coming from the people who had commuted from outside India into India. But that app was switching itself on 18 times a day for 14 days. And I don't know
Right.
what it was doing. 18 times a day, it was switching on and off. The camera was switching on automatically. I don't know
Right.
how that can be done. I'm not a software engineer in that sense, but that concerns me. If they can switch on the camera at any point of time, if they can switch on the microphone at any point of time, that concerns my privacy. And
Well,
that's my concern with
Ibrahim,
the Arogya Setu. Yes, sir.
Well, Ibrahim, one big thing is that in the US and in Australia, if you do similar kind of things, millions of people will completely refuse to accept that kind of imposition.
Right.
Hundreds of thousands of people in the Western countries have rebelled against the government for any what they consider to be an illegitimate requirement enforced on the people.
Right.
Now the problem, and I feel great about being in the West. I live in the West, in West. I live in Canada, and I feel great about living among people who are inspired by the concept of liberty and individuality.
Right.
And that is the reason why I left India. What I've seen during this lockdown or during because of the imposition of this app is that Indians are slaves. They are servile. They roll over for anything that the government imposes on them. The only reason that I have seen Indians have not accepted the lockdown is for wrong reasons, because they wanted to gang together to go to religious places, mosques and temples. That's what they wanted to do, and that's why they broke the lockdown. But then when the police came to them, they groveled in front of the police. This is the kind of people exist in India. These are servile people. And Ibrahim, this is something very interesting. When I have watched what's been happening in India for the last 2 months, I have repeatedly thought about this thing, that Indians could not have fought for independence movement against the British. They don't have the genes and the mental worldview to have fought for anything to do with liberty. They simply don't understand the concept of liberty. And that is the key reason why this country, India, will stay a wretched and poor and backward country.
Right. Even Mahatma Gandhi came back from South Africa to fight the freedom war, right? That is true. But what is the reason that you find when you think about it? Why do Indian people don't realize there is fundamental rights that they have? There is some freedom in a democracy that should be existing, but is not in India.
Well, firstly, India lived in a pre-medieval existence, in a very raw existence before European powers came to India. India was an extraordinarily backward country. Now, people talk about all the greatness India had 2,000, 3,000 years back, and there's nothing to support the greatness that they talk about to do with India. Indian politicians, particularly to do with the fanatic right, they talk about the spaceships India had, they talk about the medical system India had, and this is absolutely crazy and brain dead when they talk about something without providing evidence to support it.
Right.
India was an extremely backward place before Europeans came to India. There was no system of roads. There was nothing called the railway system. In fact, there was nothing called technology. We had not invented or created anything of our own, and because of the break from the rest of the world, because of a lack of communication with the rest of the world, India was an extraordinarily backward place. The caste system was rife. Indians actually, not until very far in the past, wore very basic clothes. They did not have the concept of wearing much clothes. Until about 150 years back, men used to marry several women across the spectrum of religions. Now, Indians can feel proud about what actually British gave them, and they now think that what they have today is what India always had in the past.
Right.
So British brought in all these concepts. I like to say, Ibrahim, and I don't hesitate to say that India even today live lives of cockroaches. And the lives of cockroaches that they live today is actually not a huge improvement on what it was 200 years back. So and people like you and me have improved a lot because of the technology that European and the Western countries have bestowed upon us. Look around us. Just about everything that you see around us is a product of what Western technology created. This is not a creation of Indian technology, because India had no technology. So the fact is that one part of civilization is technology and capitalism. Another part is philosophy and religion. And Western people are the only people who created the concept of individuality and liberty and freedom. These were not concepts in India. And unfortunately, while Indians have accepted and incorporated to a large extent Western technology, they have completely failed to accept and adopt worldviews, the philosophy, and the ways of living and thinking that the Western world has. And that is why India does not have the concept of liberty.
Well, that can be part of it. The problem that I face, and this is just my opinion, sir, the problem is that each and every civilization had their time. So even the Persian civilization had its time when they were inventing large concepts of mathematics. They were actually inventing a lot of things about space as well at the time. And then they faded away. Their time was over. And then the Europeans took over, the Western countries took over, and they have been excelling since then. I think today China is much more ahead of anyone when it comes to technology. This is a phase where they have actually gradually increased their productivity. The problem that we are facing in India, and I'm not downplaying any of the achievements that India as a civilization might have achieved in the past, the Sanskrit, the yoga, and all those kind of things are also important part of this world. But where we are lagging behind is that we are still living in the past. We are still boasting about the past rather than looking forward and into the future. Yes, sir, you have something to say.
Talking about yoga and Ayurveda is Sanskrit or Vedas is all good, and I have nothing against that. But those were created by a very small minority of Indians. The vast majority of Indians have always had a history of wretched existence, and those masses have never, ever emerged out of that wretched existence. That was the past, and that is the present, and that will continue to be the future. Western countries are the only people who have managed to create a civilization. So I restrict the usage of the word civilization to the West. And the reason is that they have actually brought into work a way of thinking and living, not just among the elite. They have brought that across the board to the masses and to the wide spectrum of people in their societies. And that is why the West is a civilization. India never was, nor is today a civilization.
All right. Okay. That's a bit harsh, but I can see the point, sir. I mean, see, my main point of doing this podcast is to bring the concepts, bring the topics that actually matter to the people up front in the foray, because the mainstream media has gone foul. They are not concerned with what kind of news they are putting. They are concerned with the TRP, with the viewership that they can actually encourage onto their platforms. So for me, the most important topic right now is that people start to understand their own rights in this country, start to understand the importance of their vote, because a lot of people, I mean, in India, there is a favoritism towards Narendra Modi. There is a majority favoritism towards him, and because of that, he has won the elections. But that favoritism has stemmed out of topics which had nothing to do with the politics, which has nothing to do with the country's economy. It was something to do with the divide and rule kind of situation that they would have created in the country. And in that divide and rule principle that they have used, they have eradicated the value of a vote that a person needs to understand while they are voting in the elections. And because of that, people are still favorite into the favoritism part of one person, and that's how Nazism started. That is, I'm pretty clear on that with a lot of people, that this is something that you need to go back and you need to read the Nazism history. And this is how it started. A person who was able to speak well came into the power. People were desperate and they gave into his heroism, into his speeches, and that's where Hitler came into the power. So I'm pretty clear on those things with people, but still people don't understand, sir. And what would you tell to those people? What will you try to do to make their minds change in this sense?
Well, I don't think I can change their minds. There is no way to change the mind of an Indian.
Why would that be, sir?
And it is easy to blame everything on Modi and Shah. Modi and Shah are symptoms of the underlying problem. They are merely the tip of the iceberg. Mm-hmm. The real iceberg is that Indians don't think for themselves. They don't have critical thinking. They follow herds. They make someone a god who they can look up to as their nanny, and they hope that this nanny would take them through the storm and save them and protect them and make them prosperous. Mm. Prosperity and safety does not come from a nanny. Prosperity and safety come from standing on your own 2 feet. Now, how many Indians are prepared to listen to that? Most Indians want to be given everything that they need so that they can be at peace with their material surroundings. That isn't what nature is like. So unfortunately, because of their expectations, they neither have prosperity nor freedom.
Right. See, times like this are the best way you can actually explain to people what's wrong with the favoritism, what's wrong with not being rational enough while you are talking, while you are voting. And it should be brought forward by people like you and me, that this is all that we are facing right now is because we did not think about who are we voting, what we will get in return.
Well, I am just not ready to accept any narrative that they create around Modi or about India. Mm-hmm. And when I refuse to accept it, I hope people who have some critical thinking left in them start to understand that their high views of themselves mm-hmm. is based on a lie. They just about every Indian who talks about how great India is talks about 3 or 4 things. The CEO of Google is an Indian, and CEO of a few multinational companies is an Indian. India created this ISRO program to send a spacecraft to the moon, or a couple nuclear weapons, for example, and this is the same 3 or 4 things that they bring forth as the reason why India is a superior country. Now that's all BS, really. And now look at the fact that 1 out of 5 people, approximately 1 out of 5 or 1 out of 6 people on the planet is an Indian. Now, if 5 or 10 of those become CEOs of big multinational companies, you should actually be ashamed that none of them live in India. They all left for the US and they all live in the US.
Right.
Now, ISRO program and nuclear weapons. Hey, we never invented spacecraft. We never invented the nuclear weapons. We copied and pasted it from the Western countries. All of the technology is either stolen or copied from the Western society. There is absolutely nothing to be proud of it. A country as small as North Korea, which has a population less than that of Delhi. Remember that.
Right.
North Korea has a population less than that of Delhi, managed to create rockets and nuclear weapons, and it is actually in war with the US and can afford to stand face to face with Americans. So if they can do it, what's the big deal if a country of 1.38 billion people managed to send a spacecraft to the moon by taxing people. You and I get taxed to send that spacecraft for a show of Modi, to get votes for Modi and to make Indians feel superior. Exactly, Ibrahim, when half of Indians go out and poop in the open. And it's a complete lie when Modi says that open defecation has stopped in India. I have traveled a lot in India over the last 6 months, and I have seen again and again people pooping in the open, men, women, old people, children pooping in the open. So now, this is another big problem. Indians accept that big fat lie from Modi as the truth when their eyes can tell you that people still poop in the open. Open defecation hasn't stopped in the country, and if open defecation is not happening, the public toilets are so horrendously unhygienic that there's a very strong probability that a lot of diseases are spreading because of those public toilets. Yes. So this is just utter incompetence. We believe in fake stuff, and believing in fake stuff does not change the reality. So coming back to your earlier question, what can I tell Indians? I can only tell the truth. And I challenge them to tell me how I am wrong about the realities of India.
Right.
And once you accept where you are, you can then start moving towards your goal. If you don't even know where you are, if you are sitting in Nagpur and if you want to go to Chennai, and if you start walking northwards, you don't know, if you don't know where you are, you don't know how you can get to Chennai. You will walk all around yourself. Right. So learn to accept where you are. India is a horribly wretched and poor country. It is one of the poorest countries on the planet. It is actually more poor than sub-Saharan Africa is. On just about all human development metrics, India is more backward than sub-Saharan Africa is. 48% of Indian children are malnourished. Right. Sub-Saharan Africa has a better statistics on these things. So Indians should give up on this feeling superior about themselves. There's nothing to feel superior about. Humility and honesty is in accepting where we are.
Right. To conclude on this, sensationalization that has been put in place by the mainstream media is the biggest reason why people in India think, especially the people living in metro cities, think that India is great, because at least in the metro cities, they are getting the basic facilities in place. But when you travel to rural areas, I mean, it is horrendous. It is really, really bad, especially in the northern India part.
Well, half of Indian cities are slum areas. So they don't even have to leave their cities. They just have to walk into their slum areas to understand what India is like.
Right.
Half of Indian cities, half of the people of India live in slum areas. And in fact, most of the constructed houses are not much better than slum areas in the Western countries. Mm-hmm. So this feeling of greatness about India is so completely fake. And Ibrahim, you mentioned about how urban people are particularly prone to thinking that they are something superior, mm-hmm. which is so utterly stupid. Educated people should be able to understand what the world is like. Right. And they don't have a comprehension, any kind of comprehension of how backward India is. Mm-hmm. They think they live in nice houses. Their houses, most of the constructed houses in India are no better than slum places. So leave slums aside, but even the constructed houses are not much better than slum places. So I'm not even sure why these Indian middle class think that they are in any way better than the rest of the world. They are among the most backward people on the planet. Now, this is very interesting, which makes me think a lot about how Indian middle class and the so-called educated people think, because they make fake constructs within their mind, and they think those fake constructs to be the reality. It is almost a version of magical thinking. It's a very superstitious way of thinking. It's a neo-education, some kind of modern way of magical thinking in which they think if they construct fake reality in their minds, it will actually be the truth.
Materialize, right? That's true. That's true. For all we have talked about, one thing that I need to make sure is that you make, either you write a book on this whole Hunger Games chapter that you have been posting, or we should actually try to make a documentary on this, because I think you have more than enough material to do that, sir. And if I can help you anywhere, it would be a great honor on my part that I will be able to help you in those documentary. Have you seen the documentary Wild Wild West on Netflix, sir?
Wild West. Eh? No, I haven't. Is it worth watching?
Yeah, it's about Osho Rajneesh, and how they
Okay.
actually captured and made Rajneeshpuram in the
In
heart of
Oregon.
Oregon. So you can actually have a look at it, and it gives you a perspective of what exactly was going on. Because a lot of people in India and a lot of people from my own friends group were actually following Osho Rajneesh while his ashram was in Pune. And once he
Right.
moved to US, they were cut off from all the realities that was going on. And I just told them, watch this documentary, trust me, watch this documentary. And they watched the
Right.
documentary in just 2 days. In just 2 days they watched around 17 hours worth of documentary, 16 or 17
Oh,
hours worth
really?
of
Wow. Okay. All
It's
right. Yeah.
interesting.
Well,
I would recommend that to you.
I'm a big fan of Osho. I quite like a lot of things he says.
Hmm.
He used to say, he's of course dead now. Maybe he did a few things which were not appropriate, but overall, we all have problems. We are all human beings.
Hmm.
And as a child, I used to read Osho, and I actually quite liked some of the things he said. And he gave me inspiration at one
Right.
point of time, his
Right.
writings,
Hmm.
to be responsible for my
Hmm.
own life and
Hmm.
move on
Hmm.
without worrying about other people. And
Hmm.
he actually, it was from his teachings that I learned that.
So the problem is not the teachings. For example, a person who is not even educationally qualified to speak about certain things still can speak, still can talk to people. They can actually get on the stage and they can talk about their wisdom. That is completely fine. But how your this movements that people create, how does that affect the people around that community? That is very
Right.
important.
Yeah.
And this show basically
Right.
shows how the state of Oregon was going through it. And
Right.
it also gives you a
Well,
sense of how, yeah, I mean, you should check it out. I will
I
recommend
will.
that
Yeah.
to you, sir. How is the international investment scene going right now, sir? What do you think is going to happen?
Well, I mean, listen, as far as COVID-19 is concerned, it is a problem, but I don't think it is as big a problem as it has been made out to be.
Mm-hmm.
The big problem has been that China probably overreacted to the virus. And as a result, all these herd mentality leaders of the world, leaders who can't think for themselves, who have no independent way of thinking,
Mm-hmm.
went along and did exactly the same thing. And we had an extremely extreme situation in India where Modi just went to impose a 100% curfew all over the country.
Right.
Now, this has destroyed economies. Now, it is probably worth talking first about India to do with COVID-19, because that is where it will have the worst effect. And the reason is that Indian GDP per capita is about 2,350 US dollars per capita. Now that makes India among the poorest countries on the planet. Anything between 300 billion to 1,000 million people go to bed hungry in India on a daily basis.
Right.
Now, if you impose curfew of 2 months, I absolutely guarantee you that these people are not only hungry and starving, there are a lot more people who are hungry and starving.
Right.
This will send millions, tens of millions, probably hundreds of millions of Indians to starvation. This is the worst humanitarian crisis, most of which is self-made, self-inflicted humanitarian crisis that India has imposed on its people. Indian economy will be in a horrible shape for the foreseeable future. I see no hope for the Indian economy. And those people who have been craving to leave this country, to leave India, will find bigger problems in terms of leaving the country, because the host countries will be now increasingly resistant to have them. So India is in a horrible shape. Africa will be in a horrible shape. The Middle East is going to continue to decline, in my view, going forward. And the reason with the Middle East decline is that oil prices have fallen horrendously over the last couple of years, which means that Middle Eastern people who have a large section of Middle Eastern people, actually a lot of them in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, who haven't actually worked for 2 or 3 generations. They don't know what working means. They have dependent on outsiders to do all their work. Those people are going to have a day of reckoning very soon, when they not only won't be able to afford foreigners to work for them, they won't even know how to work themselves. So Middle East is going to be in a horrible shape. South Latin America is in a very bad shape. They have no institutions left. It's in many ways, very similar to what India is like. There's no future in Latin America, in my view.
Mm-hmm.
That leaves me with only 2 parts of the world which I feel positive about, one is the Western countries, and the Western countries is Canada, USA, Europe,
right.
Australia, and New Zealand, and East Asia, which is Japan, Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and China.
Right.
Now, I feel very good about the Western countries. They have damaged their economies, but they are the people who are going to revert back to normal eventually. Now, they will have destroyed maybe 6 months or a year worth of their economies by going into this self-inflicted harm. But they will revert back to their normal self eventually.
Mm-hmm.
Also, because there's a huge proportion of Western people who are driven, who are passionate about freedom, who are passionate about going for something bigger than themselves. They are not just after material well-being, they are for something bigger than themselves. So I think the Western countries will emerge out fine with that. Mm-hmm. But the people who will emerge out the best out of this COVID-19 will be East Asians. Now, remember, this virus did not actually affect countries like Taiwan much at all. It did affect South Korea and China, but they went for a lockdown and they cleaned it up very quickly. For example, today there has been 0 new cases in China. They have cleaned it up. South Korea has cleaned it up. Hong Kong is reasonably fine, and these people are going back to business. They are restarting factories. Probably the economy is on its way to full production. Singapore and Japan faced a hiccup. They took action on it, and both countries are rapidly reverting back to normal. So I'm very optimistic about East Asia. I think East Asia will emerge most victorious and ahead of everyone else. Right. That includes China, a country that I adore, a country that I'm very respectful of, a country that I think shows us the way forward for the third world countries. And that is what I think, again, going back to your earlier question, Indian middle class, instead of hating China, should look at China to learn how to get from a third world country to becoming a second world country. Indian politicians want you and me to not like China. We have no option but to look up to China and learn from them.
Right. Well, China also has a disguised dictatorship, and India also has a disguised dictatorship. But the main objectives and the final goal that both the countries have is completely different. So they differ in that. Rather than having a disguised dictatorship, I would rather have a clear-cut dictatorship in place, because I don't want to live under a democratic country where there is no democracy. So that is true. Coming to your point about the Southeast Asian, East Asian countries, I have been working a lot with Singapore right now. So I'm working with the Economic Development Board in Singapore. And a lot of Indian clients are now moving to Singapore because of the low rate of income tax over there, the exemptions that they are giving, the stimulus pack, and the fact that they are not going to close their economy for anything. So even during this whole COVID-19 situation, there was a partial lockdown, but never there was a complete lockdown. They knew the importance of stable economy, and there might be a hiccup in place, but they have not taken a too bad of a hit, to be very frank. And they are accommodating Malaysian employees as well into Singapore who cannot move back to Malaysia, but they will stay in Singapore. So they have done extremely well, sir.
Well, Singapore is probably by itself, in terms of how they run politics, it's probably the best managed country on the planet. Right. They have very low taxation. Government does not interfere in your life at all. Tax forms takes you a couple of minutes, Ibrahim, and I have lived in Singapore in the past.
Right.
The government is easygoing. You can go and challenge people in the government, and they sit down with you and explain to you what is happening.
Right.
It is seen as a police state. I never see a policeman. I hardly ever see a policeman in Singapore. No one wants to run my life in Singapore. Singapore is a great place. Now, if you do a crime, yes, police institution will kick in, and it should kick in, because a criminal should be caught, arrested, and prosecuted.
Right.
And that is what Singapore does, and it should do it. I actually quite like Singapore. I think it's one of the best politically structured countries on the planet.
Right, that's true. And the same can be said of Australia and New Zealand as well. Never closed down the country.
Except that their taxation is very high. The taxation in those countries, and the problem with high taxation, Ibrahim, is that what is the purpose of that high taxation? The purpose of all that high taxation is free stuff to people who don't want to work. So people get unemployment benefits, right. Single mothers get money, people who don't look after their health get medical care, and all the free stuff that are forced into is stolen from one productive people to non-productive people is the reason for that high taxation. Right. Now that high taxation has two problems. One is that it discourages people who generate wealth, which actually destroys the future of the society, but it also creates immorality in the society by encouraging and giving money to people who are losers and whiners, and that should stop. Charity should be voluntary. It should come from churches and temples and mosques, from individuals, rather than from the government, driven by bureaucrats who have no accountability and no real interest in either of the two groups.
Well, I can't agree more on taxation on these religious institutions like temples and mosques and churches, because there is a lot of untapped income that is going all around the world. I mean, every country is exempting them out of income tax purviews. So that is true. But the distribution of this, the principle of equality in distribution of income is very important. And I think governments in these countries, if they are giving unemployment support for a certain period of time, it is much more justifiable, because the equality in distribution of income is something that will keep the society on a level and will keep them in check and keep the lifestyle as well in check. So I think I'm all for it, but for a temporary period of time. I don't want people to sit back and just earn from the government's money and just sit down for 3 or 4 years without any work.
So we certainly have to agree to disagree on this, Ibrahim. The fact is that it does not happen that Singapore leaves its people to die on the roadside. Neither does the same happen in the US. What you have to do is to make sure that people for example, if you have children, you better be prepared to raise them. If not, then you should suffer from it. If you don't find a job and you are perfectly healthy, there's no reason why government should continue to support you. And in fact, most people, if government is there to support you, you will never build social relationship. You don't have a husband to look up to. You don't have friends to look up to and support you. Because you're always dependent on the government. That breaks up the social fabric. I have a lot of good relationships in my life. I depend on those people. Those people depend on me, and we operate in a mutually profitable ventures. Mm-hmm. And they come and help me out when I need them. And this is how society becomes sustainable and keeps its systemic risks very low. When you bring down responsibility to the lowest level that it can be at, that is where society stays sustainable and is not dependent on big governments.
Right. That is true. See, as you said, agree to disagree on this point, but we all can have our own opinions. We don't have to fight or kill each other for that. I mean, that's the main thing that we are trying to educate every Indian in first place, that we can have opinions. It is a person is not anti-nationalist if he says something about his own opinion. He expresses his opinion.
Well, you raised something very interesting, Ibrahim. It's something that you see a huge difference in. Um, when I say similar things to Indians, and I hardly talk with Indians much these days, the immediate response is, "Why don't you go to Pakistan?" Or "Why do you come to India? Why do you always complain?" They go on a wrong track. This is not the way argumentation is done.
Right.
I'm a capitalist, and I can sit with a leftist in the US and have a conversation with that person for an hour without coming to blows. And that is how sane, rational people should argue.
Right.
You can have differences in opinions, but you should be able to still be polite and civilized. And when I see this impolite and uncivilized behavior from people, that is the most disgusting aspect of the society, actually.
Oh, I have a very good weapon in my hand when it comes to people telling me to go to Pakistan or any other country while I express my views. So what happened was that I was in Dubai and I was talking to one professional who has moved from India to Dubai and who is living over there. So he told me that, why are you talking against the Indian government? You should not talk like that. And you should, if you want, you should stay somewhere else, and everything he was telling me. And I told him, would you move back to India? And he said, of course not. I'm not going to move back to India anytime soon. I said, exactly. If you cannot stay in India and under that ruling, why are you telling me to stop talking about that rule? So people can argue all they want, but there is always a loophole. They themselves need to look themselves in the mirror and understand that they are being hypocrite in a lot of ways.
Well, hypocrisy is a big part of Indian culture, really. I mean, imagine, Ibrahim, and this is the most hypocritical thing to do, that in the United Kingdom, they celebrate, Indians living in the United Kingdom celebrate Indian Independence Day. Now, you only need a brain of a cockroach to understand that it is so hypocritical and stupid. I mean, look at it this way. You drove the British out of India, and then you followed the British to Britain, and now you celebrate the Indian Independence Day. I mean, this is mind-blowingly brain-dead thing to do.
That is true. But there is another silent acknowledgement of India was better under British, maybe, by a lot of people.
Well, of course. I mean, India was a much better country under the British. It was a country based on the rule of law. There were institutions, and institutions that India currently have are set up by the British. I mean, Indian Army is a wrong word, wrong term. It's the British Army. Everything to do with the Indian and Pakistani Army are British Army. The uniform is British. The way of operating, the way the institution is set up is all British.
Right.
It's the British Army. British set up all the institutions. But one thing is for sure, Ibrahim, in the last 70 years, since the time India became so-called independent, because I would have preferred to live in the British time rather than in the post-British time, in the last 70 years, everything has become worse culturally and socially.
Right.
Continuously and institutionally. Institutions of India are falling apart. India today has no court system. There is one authoritarian running the country, a totalitarian running India, and that's all India has today. So there are no institutions left. So yes, absolutely, I would prefer to live in the so-called independence India than in the so-called independent India, which is run by a bunch of brain-dead junkies.
Well, so you are a frequent traveler, right?
Yeah, I'm traveling a lot. Because I do a lot of investing work. I advise institutional investors on investing in companies, in ventures. Right. I go around, look at companies, look at projects to assess the value of those companies and projects, to assess the quality of managements of those companies, right, to be able to invest in them. I focus, let's say, 60 to 80% of my time on natural resources, which is oil, gas, base metals, gold, right, silver, coal, iron ore. Right. And I spend about 20, 30% of my time looking at companies across the spectrum.
Mm-hmm. So how is the traveling scenario looking to you right now in this COVID-19
Well, I
situation?
mean, you can hardly travel these days. You can travel within the country that you are in. So, for example, you can travel within Canada or within the US. And of course, you can't even visit or travel in India these days. But traveling has become very difficult for now. But I'm reasonably sure it will open up over the next couple of months, because the number of new cases are falling virtually everywhere in the world except for two major countries.
Right. Right.
One is Brazil and one is India, and both countries will be absolutely a disaster in a couple of months.
Well, Brazil have everything on themselves to blame for. They were actually a very booming economy not long ago, and I think they have brought themselves down. But talking about traveling, I actually travel a lot as well, and I have a challenge in my hand now because of the whole COVID situation. Now I need to be in Singapore and Switzerland at the same time in July. And I don't know how to do that, but something or the other have to be done, because Indian government is not giving any signals of opening the borders anytime soon, and I'm pretty worried about that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this, I don't even understand why they closed international flights. There was absolutely no country has done anything like this.
Yeah,
Every other country, including Brazil, has allowed all international flights and domestic flights to take place. All India had to do was to ensure that they could have restricted only Indians from coming into the country. Mm-hmm. And international airlines would have organized themselves accordingly. But why did they have to do this? No one understands. And then they went for, well, I actually understand. They went for chartered planes, which meant that Air India could charge 2 or 3 or 4 times the regular money. And that is a way to subsidize Air India. By creating chartered planes of Air India. It makes no sense. It inconveniences people. It wastes their money. They should have just let some international planes run. What if, Ibrahim, you wanted to fly to the US tomorrow morning for some medical emergency? You can't do it anymore. Yeah. You are stranded. You will die.
So there is a guy named Subhash. I hope I am actually pronouncing his name right. It's Shubhanshu or Shubhash, and he is a resident of Himachal Pradesh, if I'm not wrong. I met him on Instagram, and I've been following for a long time. And he is someone who travels on bicycle from Kanyakumari to Kashmir. Basically, that's what he have done.
Right.
And he has a travel blog in place. So he was posting, just like you are posting Hunger Games, he was posting these stories of foreigners who are being stranded in India till now. And he has been helping them with the financial support and with all other kind of support. So basically, he has gotten them the accommodation during this lockdown. And there are been some horrendous videos that he has posted in which hotels and lodge owners are pulling Italians and other foreign nationals who have come to India as tourists, pulling them by their hair and keeping them within the hotel. They won't let them leave. Just think about that. I can actually share some video. If you don't mind, sir. But that's the situation.
Yeah, I haven't seen those. I
will share his profile to you. You can just follow him, and you can actually have a look at the videos. I mean, that's the situation that we are in. And these people were not able to leave India. At the same time, they were not even able to afford. So in a very small lodge that we find in Haridwar, where the rooms are, say, for 400 rupees a night, the lodge owners were charging 3,000 rupees a night from the foreigners during the lockdown. Right. And the foreigners had exhausted all their support, all their finances in like 3 weeks or 2 weeks of the lockdown.
Yeah, it's so shameful. And government did nothing. It was the job of the government to provide food and accommodation to people, because it was government who forced these people into a lockdown situation.
Right. I'm going to bring this guy on the podcast, and I will do a very detailed podcast in that case.
Absolutely.
I will share that.
Absolutely.
With you, sir.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it is the job of Indians to shame its government. If Indians don't do it, nothing can ever change.
Right. That is true. But even those foreigners have not left India yet, sir. So there are few foreigners who have been rescued by their own government. but there are still so many foreigners who have not still been able to leave India. So where are we going? I'm not going anywhere unless and until I can actually get a flight out of India, right? I am not able to find his page right now. Let me send it later on, sir. I will share that with you. So yeah, I mean that is the big problem because of the whole globalization thing that has been adopted by professionals like you and me. We are pretty much stranded. If we are in India, I mean you are in Canada, so it is completely fine for you. But for me, I am completely on the ground, and I am trying to get the clients organized, and I'm trying to make them understand why I cannot travel. Because a lot of clients in Australia say they don't understand why I cannot travel. They can't believe that I cannot travel because in Australia they don't have a lockdown. They don't have these kind of bans on airlines, and yeah, I
You
mean that's
can't
the
even
problem.
leave your home in peace because there's a very high likelihood that the police will beat you up. I mean, you look like a rich guy, so you are okay, but 99% of Indians who don't look reasonably well off
Hmm.
get brutally beaten up by the police.
It comes down to how you argue with them. So I have gone out in the lockdown for groceries, and it has never been unreasonable travel for me. But I have all gone out for groceries, and I have been stopped by police. And I have always argued them on the logic base that this is what I'm trying to say. If you can answer me, and if I'm wrong, I will submit to you, and I will give whatever I have to do. I will go back to home. I will give you the fine, whatever it is, but you need to answer me back. And when I ask them the question, where is the authority for this? This is a lockdown. This is not a curfew. I'm not out in a curfew situation. I'm out in a lockdown where if you need some essential commodities, I have to go out. And when I start those arguments, they back off. What happens in India is that people just let go of all these inhibitions. They basically start bribing these people. They want to bribe the people in this situation, and there the problem starts. They take the power
Uh,
over you.
but but Ibrahim, the poor person has no money to bribe to the policeman. He just gets
No.
beaten up by the police without, and these people don't necessarily have to have the skill of argumentation. To have a country to have a society that follows the rule of law, you don't always have to have people who can argue with the police.
Mhm.
Police, it's the job of the police to follow the rule of law, which means that they have no authority to beat up people for no good
Right.
reason. Well, they actually can't beat up people. It's as simple as that.
True. And they are public servants. You need to make them remember that because a lot of
Well,
policemen
I
are.
think that thought does not exist among Indian public servants because they think they are the rulers. They don't know that they actually get paid and they are my servants. But that concept does not exist in India. And it will never come to exist because that's not in the Indian psyche. People go into the bureaucracy and into politics not to serve the society. They go into the politics and bureaucracy in India
Mhm.
to run lives of other people and to fleece them and to feel good about the fact that they can control lives of so many people.
Right.
They're sadistic people. And that is what you have. There's nothing you can change about it unless and until the general population decides to change itself,
Mhm.
wake up, and it starts fighting against these corrupt practices of the Indian government.
Right. So I found the Instagram page. I will just share that. Hold on. I'll share the screen. So this is the page of Shubham Dhamstuk, if I'm not.
Right.
Yeah, and he has posted all these videos. I have been trying to get him on the podcast for a long time, but haven't been able to do that. So this is just one photo in which he has all the foreigners he has helped. So that stop is a backpackers hostel which he had rented out, and I hope
Right.
you can see that, sir.
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
Yeah, so these are all the people who have been helping the foreign residents, foreigners who have come to India and were stranded in COVID-19.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
it's
Well,
a
I mean,
it's a beautiful story. I mean, it's a beautiful story.
well, if he's been doing that, he's a hero.
Oh, he is absolutely a hero in my view, sir. He's absolutely a hero. This is a video of him serving food to the foreigners.
Right. Right.
And just look at the appreciation that he's getting from them, right?
Right. Yeah, sure.
So I'm definitely going to bring him on the podcast, sir. And I will let you know whenever I'm going to have the podcast with him. I think you should.
Well, sounds good. I'll look forward to that.
Well, sir, I need to wrap this up. I have to actually go as well. So thank you very much, first and foremost, for coming on the show. It was absolute pleasure to have you on the show, and I am looking forward to having you on the show again, sir.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity, Ibrahim. It was a pleasure talking with you.
Whenever you are back in India, sir, do let me know. I can catch you up.
I will.
I will actually travel if you. I have to. I will travel to Delhi or wherever you are, and I will meet you up over there, and we might be able to do a show over there face to face. That would be great.
Sounds good. I look forward to that.
All right, sir. I wish you all the best of luck and all the good health for the future, and stay safe, sir.
To you too. Thank you.
To all the listeners, this is me, Ibrahim Susiwala, out. I hope that you will subscribe to this channel, and I hope that I will see you soon with the new podcast, with the new episode of this podcast. Till then, goodbye.